It's Doc. The gift of the flute. I'm noticing that the word legend is there. So I'm going to highlight that. If it's a legend, I know it's going to be fiction. Genre-based thinking jobs. We want to know what the setting is. We want to make sure to be looking for our main characters. We want to make sure we figure out what the conflict or the problem is the characters are dealing with. We want to know what the resolution is, how they solve the problem, if they solve the problem. And we also want to determine what the theme is, which is another way of saying life lesson. Long ago in the land of the Sioux, there was a time before the people had flutes. They had drums made of wood and animal hide and rattles made of gourd, but they had no flutes, for they had never seen or heard one. So I know that it's called the gift of the flute, and so we're going to hear about, probably, I can make the prediction, we're going to hear about how the first flute came to be. One day, a young hunter left his village to follow the fresh tracks of an elk. He carried with him a new wooden bow and a deerskin quiver holding arrows carved of wood with fine feathers and flint stone arrowheads as sharp as glass. Into the mountains he followed the tracks of the elk, who remained always just out of sight, so that the hunter never caught a glimpse of him. The elk's tracks led deep into a forest where, as night fell, both they and the elk disappeared. The setting: the hunter leaves his village and he follows an elk and he goes into the mountains right here. So our setting is just in the mountains. We also get our main character, which is the hunter. This is a cool paragraph for people who do literary analysis, because this is one of those moments where we as the reader are invited to deeply identify with this hunter, because as the hunter follows the tracks of the elk, it mimics our own reading or interpretive process where we're kind of following the words. As darkness filled the woods, the moon did not rise, and the hunter was forced to admit that until daybreak he was lost. He ate a little of the wasna, dried meat mixed with berries and fat, that he carried in his deerskin pouch, and followed the sound of water to a cool stream from which he drank. He then wrapped himself in his fur robe and tried to sleep. But the night sounds of the forest were ones of animals calling and owls hooting and trees groaning, and instead of sleeping, the hunter lay wakefully listening. The more he listened, the more he heard, until he realized that he was hearing a sound he had never heard before. It was a sound of wind, though not only of wind. It was strangely lovely, yet dry and mournful, like the whistle of a ghost, and it was somewhat frightening. With a shiver, the hunter gathered his robe around him and took a long, long time to fall asleep. He was hearing a sound he had never heard before. Whenever anything new happens in a story, we want to make sure to mark that. So this is definitely going to be one of those moments where we're going to want to remember our genre-based thinking jobs, and like, this is a conflict. He hears a sound and doesn't know what it is. And we can kind of go back for a second too and add that, this is an additional conflict. Maybe his first initial conflict is that he's following the tracks of this elk who remain always just out of sight. So it's not uncommon that a story has multiple conflicts. When the hunter awoke with the sun, he looked up and saw Wagnuga, the red-headed woodpecker, on a branch of the tree under which he had slept. The bird flittered to another tree and to another, each time looking back as if to say, "Follow." Again the hunter heard the lovely strange sound of the night before, and he took up his bow and quiver and followed the woodpecker from tree to tree through the forest until the bird came to a great cedar. There it paused on one hollow, slender branch and began hammering with its beak at holes it had pecked in the wood. When the wind entered the holes the woodpecker had carved, the branch whistled with the lovely strange sound. "Kola, friend," said the hunter to the woodpecker, "permit me to take this branch back to my people." So now we want to take down our theme or our life lesson. So our theme or our life lesson always comes from how our main characters resolve the conflict. So the lesson we learn is that something like, when searching for one thing, if we know how to read nature, we might be surprised to find secret gifts, or maybe even like something we didn't expect. Surprised to find gifts we never expected. So now let's take a look at question 6, which I believe also relates to theme. This question has 2 parts. First, answer part A, then answer part B. Part A, which of the following sentences best states a central theme of the story? So this is pretty easy for us because we just did the theme for ourselves. We can go back and remind ourselves what we said the theme was before we look at the answers that are available, and that's the practice we always want to abide by. We're not going to look at the multiple choice answers until we answer the question ourselves. So A says, taking time to understand nature can lead to rewarding friendships with plants and animals. So he does take time to understand nature. We could put a check mark on that. And that does lead to rewarding friendships with plants and animals. He kind of has a relationship with the tree, he has a relationship with the wind, and a relationship with the woodpecker, and that is a rewarding friendship. B says, it's generally better to settle for something unimportant than to leave empty-handed. This settle for something unimportant, like, I'm never sure, this is a real value judgment. There's nothing in the text that lets me know that when he decides to go after the woodpecker and leave the elk, that he's settling for something unimportant. And in fact, the flute, the fact that it's called the gift of the flute, and that we have this first paragraph here that sort of starts us off with, this is the story that takes place a long time before the Sioux people had flutes. They had other musical instruments. This tells me that the flute isn't, music is valuable to the Sioux people, and the flute isn't something that's just unimportant. So to me, this is the real word that tells me this is not, B is not going to be a good answer. And he's not settling for anything. He actually got an unexpected reward, possibly even better than the reward of the elk meat. C says, if people remain motivated and focused, they can accomplish any goal they set out for. Well, he certainly is motivated and focused, but what exactly he's motivated and focused on, it's not that it's unclear, but that he's sort of open-minded. He's not, single-mindedly focused. When he woke up and he heard that sound, that became the thing he was motivated and focused on, and he kind of left the elk to the side. And he doesn't really accomplish the goal that he set out to accomplish. The goal he set out to accomplish was, to get the elk meat. So to me, this isn't true. C can't be the best answer. D says, if people are not too focused on what they think they want, they can find unexpected surprises. So he wasn't so focused on the elk. That could be true. And he does find an unexpected surprise, which is the flute. So we said B definitely wasn't it. C definitely wasn't it. And we're kind of going to put, question marks next to A and next to D. Taking time to understand nature can lead to rewarding friendships with plants and animals. Or if people are not too focused on what they think they want, they can find unexpected surprises. I'm thinking about this last line. So it says, so the hunter returned to his village with no elk meat, but instead with the first flute, a gift of the tree, the wind, the bird, and the one who listened. So to me, all those different components are really reflected in the rewarding friendship that comes from plants and animals, and taking time to understand. And I feel like that this right here in D, this idea that he's not too focused, I feel like he is really focused. It's just that he's a person who's focused on multiple levels. He's focused on the elk up to the point when he becomes more interested in this unexpected sound. So ultimately, I'm going to say that D is not the right answer and that A is the best answer. So part B, which sentence from the story best supports the answer to A? So now we're going to look for the detail that best supports. So let's remind ourselves what answer A is. Taking time to understand nature can lead to rewarding friendships with plants and animals. So which one best supports the rewarding friendships with plants and animals? So there's going to need to be two parts to this in order for the support to match A. There's going to need to be the reward, which we know is the flute, and there's going to need to be something that reflects the plants and the animals. Both of those parts have to be there. And this taking time to understand nature, understanding nature. So maybe three parts. So which sentence best supports the answer from part A? A says, into the mountains he followed the tracks of the elk, who remained always just out of sight, so that the hunter never caught a glimpse of him. Well, this is about him following the elk. This has nothing to do with the gift, and it has nothing to do with the plants and the animals, nor about where he takes the time to understand nature. This is just about him just finding the elk, which is the initial kind of conflict. We know that has nothing to do with the support of the central idea. B says, the more he listened, the more he heard, until he realized that he was hearing a sound he'd never heard before. Well, we know that our theme comes from how the character resolves the conflict, and this is kind of his first real big conflict, is that he hears a sound he doesn't know. So B just reflects the conflict. It doesn't reflect how the conflict is resolved, so it can't be B. So C says, when the hunter awoke with the sun, he looked up and saw Wagnuka, the red-headed woodpecker, on a branch of the tree under which he slept. This is just the part where he sees the woodpecker. I mean, that's not how the character resolved the conflict. D says, again the hunter heard the lovely, strange sound of the night before, and he took up his bow and quiver and followed the woodpecker from tree to tree through the forest until the bird came to a great cedar. So this is getting us right to the point when he's going to resolve his conflict, because he's following the woodpecker, and that's going to lead him to discovering the tree branch that the woodpeckers poked the holes in, that the wind is passing through, and that's what the mysterious ghost-like sound is that he's hearing, that he didn't know what it was. So this is leading right up to that point, but it's not that. This is just the cause that leads to the effect of him resolving the conflict. So let's take a look at E. Process of elimination tells us it should be E. Let's just make sure it's right. So the hunter returned to his village with no elk meat, but instead the first flute, the gift of the tree, the wind, the bird, and the one who learned how to listen. So this is the detail that I focused on initially when I figured out what the theme was, and here it is again. So this worked out perfect. This definitely is going to be our answer, because we see that everything in A is reflected in E. And there's definitely a story can have multiple themes, but based upon what was provided for us by the test makers, this is the best one. And this is the most literal interpretation. This story certainly, is a myth that can have multiple meanings. For example, in mythology, trees, on a deeper meaning, sometimes represent the body itself, because the tree has roots that reach into the ground, almost like the base of the spine on the body, and it has the branches that go way up into the air. That kind of represents the whole kind of vertical or up and down way that the body works. So you have the roots that go like the spine, and then the branches of the tree that reaches way up, kind of like the brain of the body. And so if you wanted to kind of think about this myth on a deeper level, you could certainly think about it as not a quest into the nature that exists outside the body, but a quest into the nature that exists within the body. The hunter that tries to discover the mysteries of the within. the kind of the sort of great sort of quest for self-discovery.